But we looked at the heart and found the heart, and the heart has a tip that points caudally, and that's called the apex. And then the part at the cranial end, where all the vessels are coming and going, would be the base. Okay, which seems kind of weird, but that's just how it's called. And there are two small chambers at the cranial end, which are the right and left atria, and then at the more caudally, the right and left ventricles. Okay. So what I always do when I look at a heart, just to get oriented, is try to get it so I'm looking at the ventral side, because that's the way we normally look at them, because that's when you open up the animal, and find the right ventricle. And remember that the right side of the heart is the one dealing with deoxygenated blood. So it's getting the blood coming back from the body to the right atrium, right ventricle, and then it's going to send that deoxygenated blood to the lungs. So we just follow out from the right ventricle and up, and that's going to take us always to this vessel coming out of the right ventricle, and that is the pulmonary trunk. Exactly. Okay. And then the aorta emerges from behind the pulmonary trunk, coming from the left ventricle. So that's this here. Okay. And you can remember the pulmonary trunk's doing this, the aorta is doing this, and they kind of are twisted around each other. And if you remember back to the frog heart I was talking about yesterday in lecture, where there's that spiral valve in the conus arteriosus, that spiral valve basically forms a complete partition in these guys that separates the pulmonary and systemic circulation. And that's why there's this kind of twisting around of the aorta and the pulmonary trunk, is that division because of that spiral valve. Just to show you the same thing in a bigger heart, here's the sheep heart, apex and base. There's pulmonary trunk. Here's the aorta behind. Okay. So apex, base, right ventricle, pulmonary trunk coming up, and aorta behind. Okay. Okay. So.
Is it the human heart? Is it a human heart?
That is a sheep heart. We have human hearts. The human hearts are actually about half again as big as that. They're quite a bit larger, and I'll probably pull the human hearts out next time when we're doing the internal heart structures to look at. Although sometimes it kind of creeps people out, but they're cool. And what's nice about the human hearts is that we did the dissection. These sheep hearts we order from the biological supply companies, and they chop the vessels off really close to the heart, whereas when we do it, we can leave more chunks of vessels on, which is nice for orientation. So anyway. So pulmonary trunk, arch of the aorta. If we follow the pulmonary trunk out and towards the lung, and hopefully we can see this well without injuring something here. What you can see is the pulmonary trunk gives rise to the vessel that runs directly into the lung, and that would be the pulmonary artery. So this is the left pulmonary artery here, going to the lung. Okay. And on the right side would be the right pulmonary artery. It kind of dives back behind the heart to get over to the right side. Might be better on this one. Let's see. Yeah, I think it's easier to see here. I'm going to try to pick up this cat. Cats are very nice for this because they're bigger, but it's a little bit hard to pick them up. What I wanted to show you is there's a connection between the pulmonary trunk and the aorta right here, and that's the ligamentum arteriosum. Okay, and the ligamentum arteriosum is the dorsal part of the left sixth aortic arch, basically between the pulmonary artery and the dorsal aorta. And that's that connection that, drift on anybody? Right here. That's the connection that in the fetus serves as part of the shunt away from the lungs towards the systemic circulation. As the ductus arteriosus, and it collapses or constricts to become ligamentum arteriosum in the adult. Okay. Atria, pulmonary arteries. Oh, then vena cava. Okay, so we pick up the heart, we can see a large vessel coming from behind the heart, or caudal to the heart, we're coming up to it, and that would be the caudal vena cava. Okay, or cava. All right, that's this one here. And then in the rabbit, there are two vessels coming from the front end of the animal back to the heart, the right and the left cranial vena cava. Okay. This rabbit miraculously actually got injected. So that's pretty cool. For some reason on here I have coronary sinus at this point, and I think what the point is just that I wanted to show you how on the rabbit heart, if we look at the left cranial vena cava, you can see that it kind of runs across the backside of the heart over to the right atrium. So do you see that? This is actually probably easier to show you than most things. Okay.
Okay.
You see that? Okay. And then in a cat or a sheep or a human, same thing. On these guys, there is no left cranial vena cava, but there still is a little chamber on the backside of the heart, dorsal surface of the heart, between the atria and the ventricles, running across here, and that's called the coronary sinus. And if this was a rabbit, the left cranial vena cava would come down here and across like that. They've lost that cranial vena cava. They still have this cavity or chamber here running across the backside of the heart. And that receives all the blood coming from the heart muscle itself. It's part of the coronary circulation. So that's the coronary sinus. Pretty cool. And you can kind of imagine, just looking at this here, that this is the cranial vena cava from left side, from the right side, coming together. Basically, we're looking at the two common cardinals coming in to the heart, with the anterior cardinals, namely cranial vena cava, coming in to that section. All right, and then for last but not least, I don't know why I didn't do it when we were already there, but I have pulmonary veins. And you can see pulmonary veins. Is that on this side? Yeah, a little bit better here. Just coming back from the lungs to the heart in here, that main connection with the pulmonary veins. Oh, there. Okay. All right. And on this heart, if you actually wanted to look for the pulmonary veins, basically what you would see is these openings here into the, coming into the right, I'm sorry, the left atrium there. Pulmonary veins. Okay, so that's that first section. Then we get to the actual vessels. And cranial to the heart, we have the right and left cranial vena cava in the rabbit. Okay. There's vessels that come in from the limbs, and those are the subclavian veins. And that's this critter here that you can see, nicely injected coming from the forelimb. And technically, where I'm pointing at it here, this is not actually the subclavian vein, but is actually the axillary vein. Okay. The axillary vein is the name that it gets in the armpit. The armpit is the axilla. Okay. And then if we follow that out into the limb here, you can see it's actually not yet. There we go. There it is. Right there in the limb, that's the brachial vein. And so this vessel basically gets three different names depending on what region it's in. brachial vein, axillary, or subclavian. What does subclavian mean anyway? Under the clavicle. Yep, exactly. So in us, that's right here. Okay. And just like there's subclavian, axillary, and brachial veins, there's also the same things as arteries, okay, running along with in the other direction. So coming back to the rabbit, that's cranial vena cava. The subclavian comes in from the limb, and then the remaining vessel coming down from the head is the jugular. And technically, there's a little short segment that may or may not be present called the bijugular trunk, and then the internal and external jugular join together to form that bijugular trunk. Mostly what we're seeing here is just external jugular coming down, which is the bigger one. So this is external jugular vein here joining up with the subclavian. Did we see, I'm just trying to remember, Kyle, did you see the internal jugular in here?
Oh, no, on the side. Very sliver. On the right side. Is your right side.
The rabbit's right side?
Yeah. The brown little sliver.
Brown sliver on the right side. Oh yeah, there we go. There's the internal jugular, right there, this little thing running along. And what you'll look for the internal jugular is a small vessel running right alongside of the common carotid artery. Okay, there is a vessel that comes up and joins in with the right cranial vena cava, right behind. All right, and it's a little bit tricky to get to here. I'm not sure how well projected it was on this rabbit, because I haven't looked for it yet. Let's see if we can see. I think we're going to look for it on the cat, because it's easier to see on the cat. Yes, just harder to hold the cat, but that's okay. So if you look in here, running along the body wall on the right side, right behind the lung, is this vessel that's going to curve up and join with the right cranial vena cava, or cranial vena cava, and the cap. Okay. That's this. You see that? And that would be the azygos, or azygos vein. And that's basically the posterior cardinal vein on the right side.
Can I see it one more time, John, please?
You can see how that is running along here, and it comes in and it joins in. Did you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. Joins in with the cranial vena cava, basically common cardinal coming back to the heart. Okay. So, wow. Thank you, cat. This is a big cat. Oh, and I didn't show you on here, but there are lots of little veins and arteries basically between the ribs. Every rib has got a vein and artery associated with it, and those are the intercostal veins and arteries. Okay, let's come back then to the arterial system. And yeah, I think it's actually easier on the right. Coming out of the heart, we have then the aorta, and the aorta comes out, and there's a first branch off the aorta here, and that's the brachiocephalic artery, also called the brachiocephalic trunk. Okay, that's this thing here. Okay. And the brachiocephalic artery or brachiocephalic trunk gives rise to both common carotids. This is the right common carotid, and this is the left common carotid. Okay. So right and left common carotids, right and left common carotids, and it also gives rise to the right subclavian artery. So the right subclavian artery here. Oops, lost it there. Yeah, okay. And then independently coming off the aortic arch is the left subclavian artery. And that's kind of far over, but it's this thing here. So there's basically two things that come off the aortic arch, subclavian and brachiocephalic arteries. Okay, good. The common carotids, I should probably say, run all the way up towards the head, and the branching into internal and external carotids occurs very far up. And so I didn't ask you to look for it because it's hard to find that branching.
Is that in all mammals too? Like bears and stuff will also have it in the head region?
Yep. Yeah, in the neck, it's just common carotid. Okay. External incheck. Wow, we're doing just about everything. Is that really it? Just a couple other things we haven't seen. There's vessels that run on the inside of the thorax. You can see the vein here, and that would be, there's an artery that runs along with it. That's the internal thoracic vein, okay, here. And in the cat, because they have, well, we haven't really quite gotten to that yet, they have a single cranial vena cava, they have a single midline internal thoracic vein, and that's this one here. Okay. In the rabbit, there's one from each cranial vena cava going to the inside of the chest. And then there's also internal thoracic arteries, which is shown here. That's an internal thoracic artery. Subclavian. What I didn't point out about the cat has to do with the veins. I said, oh, it's only got one cranial vena cava. Going back to the diagram I drew, excuse me, what we're looking at here is the cranial vena cava of the cat. And then just in front of that, what we see are two vessels, and these are called the brachiocephalic veins. Okay? So this is not present in the rabbit. Here's the cranial vena cava, and then here's the left and right brachiocephalic vein of the cat. Left and right brachiocephalic vein. And the right brachiocephalic vein here is just corresponding to what in the rabbit is still cranial vena cava. It's basically still the anterior cardinal vein. The left brachiocephalic vein is that shunt that develops in the cat across from the left to the right side. Okay. So, for you guys, this left one is that shunt across from the left to the right side, whereas this right one is just the right cranial vena cava. Okay, but they're both called brachiocephalic veins. Yes. Everyone get a good view? All right, cool. That's a little bit strange. What else? I think the only other thing that we need to see is the vertebral artery. Okay, and the vertebral artery. Did you find it on this guy? Not necessarily. Not yet. Okay, the vertebral artery I want you to look for, because even though it's very small, it's very important. It's basically the only way, other than the carotids, that blood gets up to the brain, to the head. And this vessel dives into the vertebrae, and it runs along through those transverse foramina that we saw in the cervical vertebrae, where there's those holes in the transverse processes, runs up along there, and then it dives in through the foramen magnum into the skull. Okay. And in people, clinically, this can be hugely important because if somebody has some kind of a clot in their carotid artery, they can still get blood up to their brain through the vertebrals. Finding them, on the other hand, can be a little bit tricky. And I'm just going to take a quick peek. Generally, where these guys are found is coming off of the subclavians, and you want to look for a small vessel. Ooh, I found it. Small vessel diving in towards the vertebrae from the subclavian artery. And so that would be basically right in here in the rabbit, and you're not going to really be able to see it except sort of the general region, but that would be it in there. Okay. So sort of generally where it would be. And then in the cat, I'm not 100% sure. Jasmine and I were just kind of working on this, and wasn't completely happy with this vessel, but I
Oh, no, look at that.
I know, like, where did it go now? I lost it. This one here, yeah. You see this branch coming off the subclavian that's diving in towards the vertebrae? I'm pretty sure that's the vertebral artery on this one. You see that?
Reminds me of trying to pick up Dexter. He's starting to get a belly now, so I've had to cut down his food.
Okay. And as long as I've got this cat here, I'll just point out that cats do exactly the same thing as rabbits. They have right subclavian, right and left common carotid arteries coming off the aortic arch from the brachiocephalic, and then a separate left subclavian here coming off independently. It's just a little more elongated in the cat. Okay. All right, I think that's pretty much it for